man stayed at a hotel where there were lots of people, so, you wouldn't bomb a hotel and endanger other people's lives. So, yeah.
So
and then once my father was killed, we stayed at Sidney Poitier's house. And at the time, his wife was Juanita Poitier. And believe it or not, it was Congresswoman Bella Abzug. We moved into her house.
My
mother
God, really?
bought her house. She reached out to my mother and her husband, because they were, advocates, and they were both attorneys, she and her husband, and they were in the civil rights movement, and they worked for, working to help rid injustice and, all of the things that everyone was working towards in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And so they reached out to my mother, concerned that, her home was firebombed, her husband was killed, that she had 4 babies, she was pregnant with twins, and they were concerned about where was she going to live. And so they rallied, they got a lot of the women got together. Many of the artists, I can't even think right now, Juanita Poitier's wife, Ruby Dee, it was a bunch of women. I think Lorraine Hansberry had already passed away. But there were a group of women, and, they made the purchase from Bella Abzug for this house for my mother. We moved in, and then shortly after they transferred it into my mother's name, because I don't know that they would have allowed the sale to go to Malcolm X's wife. So it's so you get to see many of the challenges that my mother went through. And, for her to still be this compassionate activist, Nina Simone's daughter, Lisa Simone Kelly, lived with us, and you think 6 daughters are already enough to take care of. But my mother was just so amazing, very compassionate. And so she came and she lived with us, and we all went to camp in Vermont, during the summertime, and came back home and went to Montessori and yoga classes and music lessons and, history lessons and religious lessons and everything. My mother just really instilled so much in her girls.
It's interesting you talk about the firebombing, because and here's your dad, this iconic name, known worldwide, and when they bombed his home,
right,
that his little babies are sleeping in.
Right, that's right. They threw a Molotov cocktail into the nursery where the baby slept, into the nursery of his home. And, that's enough to say, hey, you think you're so big and bad, but we're going, you're human.
Right.
And quite naturally, a young man, of course he had to be fearful, I mean...
Wait, but not only that, but now you don't even have clothes. They were doing like a clothing drive and trying to gather up clothing donations for the family.
Well, I didn't know about that, but right. I just think all of that was just, when you want to set an example, and you're like, you're not so tough after all, buddy.
Now, but then even after the death, though, like your mother was struggling. Was there tons of donations coming in from all over, or?
I don't know, but I know that my mother had her nursing degree and a master's degree, and she went and got, she had her bachelor's degree, and she went, and her nursing degree, and she went and she got her master's degree. She would drive from our home once a week when we were children, from Mount Vernon, New York, to University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and she got her Ph.D. So, there's just so much inspiration understanding the story of Dr. Betty Shabazz. When my mother passed away, I had to take a step back and look at her as a woman, not as mommy, but look at her as a person and look at all that she was able to do, and just be so inspired and empowered by her model, that I wanted to share, this with others, that, she never accepted no or I can't as answers for herself. She just, was focused, steadfast, persevered, and she triumphed in the end, because she was still loving, she was still caring, she was still giving great sense of humor. She loved music, you know. So it was a wonderful childhood that she gave to us.
And you have no excuse. You know what I mean? If you see your mother doing that, her husband was assassinated. She has 6 kids, all on her own. You know, and then she accomplishes all. You know, what can you really say? Well, you know, hey, you know, life is tough. You know,
right. And you know, they did this story on Lifetime that, you know, was absolutely. It was a beautiful story about friendship. You know, about sisterhood. You know, that when you have someone that you can rely on, who understands you, you can share. You know, that. You know, it's so much more helpful than living without, you know, the friendship, without the sisterhood, without the bond, without the support. It's a beautiful story, but it was definitely not my mother. You know, my mother was was much more than what was portrayed.
Now let me ask you this. Now, the firebombing, did you ever find out who was behind that? You know,
yes, of course. You know, I mean, you can look in the books, and you know, it's in all of the books of, you know, it wasn't the Nation of Islam. Let's put it like that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then you think it was like, you're afraid to talk about it? It was like the FBI?
No, I'm not afraid to talk about it, but I just, you know, I think that, you know, you just, what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what I think. Because I'm having an FBI whistleblower come on the show in 2 weeks from now, Dr. Fred Whitehurst, and when we talked off the air, he said he thought it was the government, the FBI, who killed your dad, and who was probably the firebomber too, I would suspect.
Right, that's right. And you know, we have this film that you know, we're working on with a couple of people that were interviewed, and, you know, they were part of, you know, the whole thing. And they'd say, but I could tell you that it wasn't the Nation of Islam. You know, my father talked about going to France, and France not wanting him there because the assassination was supposed to take place in France, and they didn't want the blood. They didn't want the blood of Malcolm in history. You know, that it was in France or on France's soil. And so my father said that, you know, just from that alone was very clear that it wasn't the Nation of Islam, because the Nation of Islam didn't have that kind of power, that reach.
All right, that makes sense. Yeah, they couldn't have pulled that off in France.
Right.
But in Harlem...
They couldn't have orchestrated in France, right.
But in Harlem at the Audubon Boom, now you were there that day, right?
That's right.
But you were just like a little 2-year-old.
Baby.
Yeah, and no memory.
No memory.
Now, what kind of memories do you have? Because I can remember when I was 2 years old. I can remember stuff of my dad carrying me around and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this is what I say in Growing Up X, that I wasn't quite 3, okay? So it wasn't like I was still a baby, but I wasn't quite 3 years old.
Yeah.
And there's things about my father I remember. I remember his voice. I remember his beautiful, you know, these big teeth. I remember a smile. I remember my blue and white rocking chair. You know, I remember my beautiful brown doll. I remember having cookies with him. You know, so there's you know, those flickering images that I remember. Do I remember conversations? Obviously not, you know. But when I see photos of us, like there's this one photo that I have here right now, you know, in my office, and it's me just looking straight into my father's eyes, you know, or me sleeping on his chest, or just, you know, things that, you know, to me are very, you know, just wonderful, beautiful reflection, because I always wonder, you know, what did he say? Because, you know, if you have a baby, you talk to your baby, because you know your life is, my father knew that he wasn't going to live a long life. And so he's got photos with my sister, you know, with my sisters. You know, when I come across them, I'll send it to whichever sister it is. And you know, I found some photos of my father and Kabila, you know, just the two of them, him walking her, or, you know, whatever, and then some photos of me and my dad, and they're just, you know, they're really wonderful and special, because you see his humanity. He was a young man. He was a human being, you know, and look at what he did. He had a reaction to the injustices. He didn't walk around, with a chip on his shoulder. He had a reaction to anyone being treated unfairly. If it was the church bombing of little children, if it was nonviolent protesters, with dogs being sick to them or fire extinguishers, whatever it was, he had a profound reaction. If it was elderly women, if it was women in general being disrespected, whatever it was, he had a profound reaction, and he tried to build up people who have been oppressed for so long, who have been told that they didn't have history, who were told, inaccurate things about their history. There was no such thing as Tarzan, but, you had people in the 50s thinking Africa was this place where Tarzan lived, that all Africans were barefoot with sticks in their noses, and instead of understanding that the pyramids or that they were refined and industrious African people, on the continent, and that was the reason for them being enslaved, that they were scholars, that they were doctors, that they were priests, that they were farmers, that they were people, and that they were enslaved, that they were not already slaves. They were enslaved human beings that were brought here and endured trauma for generations. But look at all of what they contributed to our country. Look at all of what we're able to have today. And had it not been for them, we would not be here. So it's a matter of honoring them, putting their stories in perspective, including them in American history and world history, and setting the truth to all of these false stories so that there can be a sense of respect for everyone. So I am absolutely proud of, those young students who take a stand, that they stand up against injustice. This young man refused to eat food. That is a sacrifice, and we have to applaud that. A sacrifice to stand up against the injustice. We cannot take it anymore. We cannot, we have to, at some point, we have to correct the injustices of our history, that we have to tell the truth about these injustices. We have to tell the truth about history and allow everyone, dignity, honor, and all of the things that are deserving.
Amazing. Another thing people need to remember is that your mom was carrying twins at the time of this assassination.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing how far you've come. Let me ask you a question now. Now, your older sisters, how much of a childhood did they have with your dad?
Well, everybody was, like my oldest sister was 6. Okay. But I would say February, my father was killed, and in November, she would have been 7. And my next sister was 4. In December, she would have been 5. I was 2. In July, I would have been 3. And so then we have Gamila, who had just been born, and so she wasn't quite 1 year old. She would have been 1, in July. And then my twin sisters, obviously, they were not born at all. So my mother had a lot of little toddlers, and you can just imagine, she was a young woman herself, and to see her young husband, killed in front of her, and to have these babies, and then to have been pregnant with twins, was a challenge, to say the least. But, look at all of, look at what, she became and contributed and everything else. I mean, she went on and got her PhD. She could have, and that says a lot about her, her value system.
It absolutely does. Now, was she involved in any activism after the assassination? Absolutely.
She was, a women's activist, women's liberation movement. One of the things that, I think was, really beautiful about my mother, it speaks a lot about who she was, is in the 70s, my father was killed in 1965. So in the 70s, she had a lot of babies, right? And my mother developed a young mother's educational development program. And that was for young women who would find themselves unwed, and pregnant. And instead of having their education interrupted and sent south, like her mother, to have a child, and then, you don't know that this person is going to be able to go back to school, that they would be able to go to school and not feel shunned by society or ashamed by people, that all of